He was my mentor. The man I trusted more than myself. He taught me the business, gave me my first break, and then he took everything. "You're too small for the big game," he said as he signed the papers that stole my company. He left me with nothing. No money, no home, no name. And worst of all, he made everyone believe it was me who betrayed him. 3 years I disappeared. No one knew where I was. No one knew what I was doing. But today I'm back. And he's about to learn that he made the biggest mistake of his life. He taught me everything he knew. The rain that night washed the city like bleach. It blurred faces and names, made every light a smear. I walked past the glass tower where he held court and watched men bow with smiles that smelled of oil and old money. From the sidewalk I could see my old logo through the lobby lights. A bright, perfect circle. It used to mean hope. Now it meant the funeral of something I'd built with my hands. They'd called it a business restructure. Friendly shareholders. Strategic realignment. Legal language that tastes like vinegar. The board had turned overnight, signatures appearing like paper cuts across the thing that had been my life. I remember the exact pen he used. The cheap grin. The way he didn't look me in the eye. They made a scapegoat of me and let everyone believe the easiest lie. When I left, walked out with one backpack and a broken watch, people said I'd never come back. They celebrated with champagne, and my name became a quiet joke in the suites. But when you build something from nothing, you don't lose it in a night. You hide the pieces. For the first year I had nothing but time and a map of mistakes. I slept in motels with cracked lamps. I ate the cheapest food I could find and learned to ignore the sting of hunger. Every day I woke before dawn, practiced phrasing, studied contracts, audited balance sheets until the numbers felt like muscle memory. The hunger didn't quieten the ache, it sharpened the focus. Revenge, I decided, would not be fireworks, it would be precise economics. Money came in small, honest ways. I fixed things. I consulted under pseudonyms. I taught workshops under assumed names. Each dollar was a seed. I lived by 2 rules: learn what he knew and learn what he feared. His empire was not a building. It was relationships braided into deals, favors kept like promises in locked drawers. He sold confidence and people bought it because they wanted comfort. To break a man like that, you don't storm his castle. You take his currency and you show him the cost. In the second year I became 2 people. By daylight I was a ghost on the feeds. Online contractors, cold emails, code, the small transactions that don't show up on glossy profiles. By night I was a student again, less arrogant this time, reading law texts until my eyes blurred, studying corporate governance, shareholder rights, and the tiny clauses that become landmines if you know where to look. I found an old partner on a forum once. A junior exec who'd been loyal until the meeting that made him choose the side with the drinks. He was small time now, living in a rented studio with a cat and a vinyl player. He didn't want money. He wanted a reason to sleep. We spoke for hours over bad coffee and worse puns, and he told me the thing every betrayed founder learns. The people who take your company rarely know how to run what they stole, they know only how to press other people to do it. That is where the weakness lies. I didn't want to destroy him with drama. I wanted the quiet dismantle. I wanted his bank balances to look the same while the world around him eroded. I wanted his friends to stop calling. I wanted his board to wake up one morning and find that the contracts that gave them comfort were carved from sand. So I started small. A missent memo here. An accidental disclosure there. A friendly investor who got a private demo of a product that solved a problem my old company had long promised to fix. That investor wrote a note. The note went to a competitor. The competitor liked what they saw and quietly purchased a license in an area where my old company had been making loud promises but not shipping. The press wrote a friendly paragraph. The board breathed relief. But relief was temporary. The market moved. Cash flowed to where the product actually worked. Each small move was a scalpel. Invisible. Surgical. They didn't notice because they were busy basking in the glow of what they thought they'd bought. Greed makes men arrogant. Arrogance makes men lazy. Their quarterly reports were thin on substance. Their marketing was loud to fill the silence of product delays. They had PR agents and joke-friendly CEOs and a string of flattering interviews. They were already building the stage for a product that wasn't theirs to claim. While they rehearsed, I changed the stage. I introduced new contracts under a shell company I registered 30 towns over. Simple things: distribution rights, supply agreements, non-exclusive deals. Nothing legally reckless. Everything carefully balanced to avoid the eyes of their lawyers but to siphon momentum. Talent started to move. A developer here, a product manager there. People say loyalty is cheap. I say it's often the only currency left when money is contentious. I recruited quietly. Ex-employees who had left with their pride intact. A head of ops who'd been promised equity and got a memo. A designer who'd been ghosted after a late-night call. They joined me not for the idea but for the truth. The people I recruited had been burned, and they wanted to rebuild something that mattered. We built in the daylight, but our plan unfolded in the dark. We finished prototypes no one expected. We shipped updates with a velocity that made competitors blink. We created micro-features his company promised for months. Users migrated. The product that had once been my signature began to appear under a new logo, ours, and people noticed. Clients who once canceled calls started to set up meetings again. He called once. His voice was the same syrupy tone. You're persistent, I'll give you that. I let the silence do its work. He believed silence was my surrender. He believed his triumph had broken me. He was wrong. When the first industry blog wrote the paragraph comparing our product favorably to the old company's stalled release, the board called emergency meetings. They rewrote marketing briefs. They doubled down on spend. He made speeches on stages about vision and legacy. A CEO must look unshakable. He wore that mask like armor. But masks slip. They creak. The first time a major client signed with us after being unimpressed for months, the creak became a crack. I didn't celebrate in rooms. I kept the celebration small, in the eyes of the team who'd risked everything. We bought better chairs. We paid bonuses. We replaced old laptops. We invested in the product because we believed in it, not to manipulate metrics but to make something good. To make something that would not be just another acquisition target. The press noticed 2 years into the comeback. Articles followed. Interviews. A soft profile piece calling us the scrappy team that refused to die. He smiled at the piece and called me a nuisance in front of a donor. His face said what his words didn't: panic. When you build a house of cards on reputation, a single honest roofline is enough to make people doubt. Our customers were stubborn. They kept paying. Their loyalty was infectious. The market is not a vacuum, it listens to the people who use the product. Word of mouth is a slow, lethal current. It pulled. The first public moment came at a conference, a mid-sized summit famous for awkward networking buffets and glossy stage lights. He had the keynote, I had a small demonstration in an off-room. He walked across the stage with the practiced ease of a man used to cameras. He said everything a CEO says when things are unclear: we're pivoting our focus, we're investing heavily in R&D, we value our customers. Down the hall, a line formed at our booth. Actual users lined up, waiting to try the feature promised for months. One of them came to the stage afterward with a tablet and showed the audience a live demo of our product. Murmurs rippled through the room. The press started to ask better questions. I watched him watch us. The mask dipped for a moment. It was a clean shot through a shuttered room. An honest face of someone who just realized he might have been robbed of not only paper, but the soul of what he tried to buy. After the talk, he made for the exit. I followed. Congratulations on the demo, he said, like a man who polishes a wound with sugar-sweet words. You've been busy. So have you, I replied. You've been busy pretending. He laughed, a bitter bark. You think competition breaks you? You should be grateful. I once taught you how to sell ice in summer. People want water, I said. Not the shape of a promise. His chauffeur opened the car door. He paused. You should know your place. Not anymore, I said. He smiled then, not because of triumph but because he was trying a gambit. Let me be clear, there are things you don't understand about business. There are people who made choices and you can't undo those. I'm not trying to undo, I said. I'm trying to build better. He folded his hands. You can try, he said. But remember, the game I play? I know every rule. And I know how you taught me to play it. He flinched. A micro-expression, rapid, human. Crack. That night I drove home to a team that had been built in gutters and lit by laptop screens. We had small wins. We had users who believed. We had enough to talk about payroll and the first real board meeting. But nothing would be complete until he felt the absence he'd engineered. Not violent absence. Not a show. A slow, irreparable erosion. A quiet that robs the dance floor of its music. I thought of him signing the papers, the cheap pen, the cheap grin that looked like a snake mid-smile. I thought of the nights I drove with no radio and whispered plans into the dark. When the board call came 2 months later, the one that changed the narrative, I sat on a bus across town, listening while the world thinned to static. They announced a restructuring. A new acquisition. They bragged about synergy while quietly transferring assets into a subsidiary with holes I knew how to exploit. The market punished them for misdirection. Stock wobble invited predators. The outside world sees only the headline, it never sees the slow digestion. The predators smelled weakness. Offers came. Consultants came. Men who advise in taciturn rooms with terrible wine and good scissors. Etched across the top of the next morning's news, old guard falters, newcomer rises. Not my name. Not yet. But a tide had turned. It's not glamorous to watch a man lose what he didn't actually build. It's not movie perfect to see arrogance fade into the same smallness he once sneered from. But there is a quiet justice in the small things. Emails that are ignored, dinners that are less crowded, a partner who no longer answers a call. The true victory is in the rearrangement of day-to-day dignity. I had learned something else too. Revenge tastes different when it's accompanied by work you're proud of. I had rebuilt more than a product. I'd rebuilt a team, a culture, an honesty that held when nothing else did. When the offers came for talks and interviews, I accepted a few and declined many. I took care rarely, but I took it well. People asked in hushed tones if I'd ever confront him, if I'd ever make public the theft. I smiled and said, "Time has a way of showing the truth." I knew I wasn't finished. The man who taught me everything still sat in a taller tower with friends who watched oceans for signals. He still had men who would make moves to preserve his honeyed world. But the game had changed. The boardrooms had new signatures. The people who once drank his wine now called our offices with questions. This was only part one of a long unspooling. The erasure of a thief's comfort does not come overnight. It comes in contracts, in satisfied customers, in the steady repair of trust. I stood on the roof of the little office one evening and watched the city lights like an army of persistent stars. My reflection in the glass was not a mask. It was a man who had been taught every cut and learned how to stitch. He had taught me everything. That was the mistake he made when he thought he'd broken me. He taught me the instrument with which I would replace his song. And I was only just beginning to play. He noticed the tremor before anyone else did. Not the press pieces or the product demos. Those were obvious. It was the small things. A partner who stopped returning his emails, a vendor who delayed shipments for no reason, a dinner invitation that vanished from a calendar. Success makes noise. Fear makes people careful. Fear makes them invisible. He called a private meeting in his tower, the one with the wide view and the art that cost more than half of the neighborhoods we'd grown up in. Men and women in suits that never learned to sweat gathered around his table, nodding like chess pieces. He spoke calmly, the kind of calm that masks resentment. "This is a coordinated effort," he said. "Someone is actively bleeding us dry, not by force but by taking our advantage, customers, talent, IP. We don't leak. We do not lose market share to an unknown band of hustlers." They all agreed. They have to agree when your empire trembles. He didn't shout. He never did. He pulled out a folder. A name circled in red on a page. Marcus Vale, former VP, resigned. The file had a note. Reemergence suspected. Track and neutralize. He always had people who knew how to dig. Former generals of corporate wars. He called them quietly. He stood and walked past the floor-to-ceiling windows and watched our skyline. When he turned, his eyes were colder than usual. "Find him," he said. "Find him and make it unpleasant." This was the part he'd been trained for. The part where a man buys back the world he thought he owned. He pulled on the threads of my life with precision, leaked rumors to a trade journal about our unsustainable growth model, hired headhunters to entice my best product people with brutally aggressive offers, paid consultants to audit our code base and find something, anything, to slow us down. He hinted at regulatory inquiries, whispered to old investors, and used the town's network like a saw, ever so quietly sawing at our legs. The first hit came fast. A senior engineer who had stayed up for months helping perfect a microfeature texted at 2 a.m. that a restructuring offer had arrived from a quiet fund that wanted her to move immediately. The fund's money was real. It was tempting. She took the call, and the seed of doubt, "Can we compete with that?" was planted. That week our payroll hiccuped. A vendor demanded advance payment with the thin smile of someone who'd just been offered insurance. A client delayed a launch because of legal concerns. The air in the office thickened. The team's faith, our secret, fragile oxygen, wavered. I watched it all and felt a cold recognition. He was using tools I'd seen him use in lectures and meetings. He was playing by the rules he'd taught me. Only now the rules were turned into traps. We fought back the only way we could: speed and truth. We published a transparent roadmap. We invited customers to open demos. We doubled down on core features, shipping patches at midnight, and stayed in close contact with the users who mattered. I began to hold weekly calls with the team in the lounge, coffee cups and cigarette breaks and maps of contingency plans plastered across the wall. We rebuilt trust with every bug fixed, every honest message. But he escalated. One cold morning, a story broke online. An anonymous post claimed that our new platform had security vulnerabilities that exposed user data. The post was a shredded fragment of a test environment, a smear designed by someone with inside detail. Our phones lit up with frantic clients. Our legal counsel called. The regulators sniffed. The PR team breathed fire to contain it. It was a distraction he'd bought and paid for. I pulled the code logs. The breach was false. A decoy. But the damage was real. Our churn ticked up. The board of one of our major clients nervously called for an audit and hinted they might pause the contract. Months of momentum hung on a thin rope of credibility. This wasn't a battle on a product board, it was a war for perception. He had the resources to manufacture doubt. He had the money to hire noise. He had learned to buy the room where people decide what's true. So I went to the place where he would least expect me, his old circle. I walked into the very suites where his philanthropy dinners took place and found the same men who'd once sipped white wine and nodded at his jokes. I didn't go as an attacker. I went as a memory. Do you remember when you all doubted me? I asked one man who had once laughed at a prototype. He looked at me blankly for a second as if the memory needed context. It was the currency I used now, shared history. I offered them a choice. Come see the truth and I'll show metrics. Speak in private and I'll listen. I didn't threaten. I reminded them of what I'd built and what they wanted in the market. People are not loyal to men, they're loyal to outcomes. When outcomes become ambiguous, loyalty becomes negotiable. One by one I rebuilt a list of small allies, a CFO who'd been burned by hype, a regional director who remembered the product's soul. They came because business is pragmatic, profits matter more than grudges. With them I built a second layer of defense. Legal buffers, expedited bug bounties, and a public promise to hire an independent auditor. It bought us time. Enough to patch the reputational hole, enough to stabilize one major account. He noticed the shift. He doubled down. The next move was personal. At a gala where he was being feted, an event of charity and cultivated smiles, he made a display. He toasted the industry and made an oblique joke about new entrants who haven't paid their dues. Cameras flashed. He smiled that shallow smile, a practiced mask that wanted to look benignly superior. I didn't attend. But I had someone there who sent a live feed. After his speech, he stepped into a green room to speak with donors. There, under the art and the cold light, he was confronted by a man he'd once cut loose for a missing quarterly target. The exchange didn't get on camera. Someone recorded audio. It leaked. The conversation revealed a brittle undercurrent. Someone in his inner circle muttered that the current growth was manufactured, and that the board needed to consider leadership changes if results didn't improve. It was a whisper that made its way to an aggressive podcast host who loved scandal like sugar. Within 24 hours, gossip swelled into speculation, and speculation became headlines. Investors hate gossip. They hate thinking their returns are at risk. He hit back hard. He retained crisis PR, he arranged private dinners with key investors, and he launched a counter-narrative. We were the steady ship. The newcomer was a flash in the pan. The press moved on. But the boardroom did not forget. Legal knives came next. He had legions of lawyers who could draft letters that sounded like virtue. Cease and desist for supposed trademark infringements. A notice that our code allegedly infringed patents. Lawyers like vultures circle precisely because their paperwork smells of defeat. We responded. Our legal counsel, a quiet woman named Priya, drafted counter-letters focusing on the authenticity of our IP and the timelines of development. We compiled commit histories, timestamps, version control logs, a modern archaeology that proves who built what. The battle moved into dry rooms with fluorescent lights and scanned pages, where truth is measured in metadata. It was meticulous, exhausting work. We handed authorities logs, we took depositions. My team pulled all-nighters to collect evidence, chat logs, commit signatures, invoices. We hired digital forensic teams who traced the smear post back to a paid IP address. The trail led to a shell company that eventually bent back toward his network, a vendor he'd once quietly paid to perform competitive intelligence. We had him on a line. Not a smoking gun, but a rope long enough to pull a corner of the rug. When the first subpoena landed on his PR firm, the market blew. His board convened 2 emergency calls in 24 hours. Investors asked questions they'd never asked before. He took calls in the elevator that lasted the length of a floor, voice clipped and controlled like a man who'd always had an exit plan for any problem but not necessarily one for a loss of face. He tried one last violence, to buy us out quietly and reclaim the narrative. His emissary arrived, smiling, offering a deal too polite to be real: cash, a non-compete, and the comfortable erasure of everything we'd built. It was the classic fix he'd always favored: turn the problem into a ledger entry. I told the emissary I'd rather keep my company than his money. He left with a polite bow and a folder that would later become a piece of courtroom evidence. The refusal burned him. Pride is a poor currency to spend on illusions. War had turned public. The press loved it. Old guard versus new blood, they wrote. Analysts split into factions. The city had a new story to consume over lunch. But the real battle was quieter. It was in retention metrics and user sentiment, and in the way a former board member picked up a phone to ask a question, then hesitated and hung up. I watched the man I once trusted pace in an office that felt suddenly too small. I learned something about vengeance as strategy. It isn't the explosion. It's the erosion. And while he assembled lawyers and dinners and gossip, I assembled truth. Commit by commit. Conversation by conversation. The courtrooms, like a slow furnace, would either vindicate us or burn us both. I had faith in one immutable thing: the product we built solved a real problem. The truth of usefulness resists smears better than any PR spin. By the time the first court date arrived, both of us had bled resources. The press parked outside the legal building like vultures, their flashes like small sunbursts. Inside the room, we produced timelines, commits, invoices, testimonies from engineers who described the code in ways only creators do, with affection and memory. He produced glossy slides and a narrative of acquisition and leadership restructure, his agents framing his actions as strategic realignment. The judge listened. He did not clap for drama. He read metadata like scripture. It wasn't a clean win on day one. Legal fights never are. You win rounds, you defend holes, you survive. But the initial ruling went our way, an injunction preventing his company from claiming exclusive rights on a contested module. The court did not yet dismantle his empire, but the market registered the fissure. He left the courtroom with a face I had not seen in years: surprise quickly suppressed. That night, he made calls that sounded like terms being set in an emergency. I stood outside the courthouse and didn't smile. Victory tasted like ash sometimes, a reminder of the cost. My team hugged. We'd done something most thought impossible: survived the first professional firefight. But the war continued. He would not go quietly. Men like him double down, and the next moves are often the cruelest. When I walked back to the office, the city felt the same and different. Lights burn, windows glow, lives continue. But we had shifted a gear in the machine. He understood now that he had opponents who played by his rules, because he had taught them. There would be more letters, more threats, perhaps even an operable attempt to discredit me personally. Perhaps worse. But we had reach, we had allies, and we had the quiet stubbornness of the people who build rather than prey. I sat at my desk that night and looked at a framed photo we kept on the wall. The old team, exhausted and smiling after our first deployment. The faces were worn but true. I traced the corner of the frame with my thumb, thought of the cheap pen he used to take everything, and felt the calm before the next storm. He had struck back. I had expected as much. The difference now was that when he hit, he would not be hitting a man without a map. He'd be hitting a man who had learned the lines of the playbook he'd written. And that, I thought, setting my jaw, was the best kind of revenge. He thought he won. He took everything: my job, my name, even the woman I loved. But monsters always forget one thing. The quiet ones are the most dangerous. When his empire started burning, I didn't lift a finger. I just watched. Every secret he buried, every lie, surfaced on its own. His friends vanished. His money froze. He called me once. I let it ring. A week later, I saw him again, alone, shaking, staring at a world that no longer feared him. He looked up and said, "You destroyed me." I smiled. "No," I said. "You did that yourself." Then I walked away. No more anger. No more hate. Just silence. Because the best revenge isn't pain. It's peace.